Okay, we're making our way back now. For our last 10 minutes, we're going to ask people if they have a comment, a question, a thought that they would like to share, and around Brian's presentation specifically, and then we'll give Brian a chance to respond to that. So these are going to be rapid fire and fairly quick because we only have a few minutes left in our agreed upon time. So if you have a thought or a comment, again, that little hand, if you push that little hand, that will indicate to Jeremy that you have a thought, and he'll pop you up as a presenter, and you can share your thought or comment or question, and Brian will respond to it. But I know we also have some of our panelists. So Kelly or Eric, Philip, maybe you have a thought that you'd like to share with the rest of us while people are gathering up their own thoughts. So any one of the panelists, anything that you would like to comment you'd like to make, or question or thought that you'd like to share, and we'll ask Brian to give some reactions to it.
I think, let me just start, Doug, with expressing hope and optimism. I don't see this as a dreary or frightening period at all, but rather a readjustment. I mean, churches and spiritual communities will continue to exist. They'll meet in different places, have different ethos and leadership. Hopefully they'll dispense with some of the hymnals, but they'll still exist. Leaders are already evolving in these new kinds of communities to do the new kinds of leadership. So what we're really talking about is structures catching up with the emerging reality. It's just the nature of human beings that our structures run 10, 20, or 200 years behind where the actual activity is. And this meeting, the work of convergence, the work of reimagining, is part of doing that catch-up work.
Excellent.
Okay, Doug, I have Fernando with a question.
Hi, Fernando. Your video is going to come on here in a second, and your audio. So what are your thoughts and comments or questions, maybe for Brian or for the rest of us? So you're going to get unmuted. There you go, Fernando.
Yes, how are you, everybody? Well, thank you for doing this kind of dialogues. I think is being important. I think one of the things that I'm missing here, or I would like to point out, is how Eurocentric, white perspective in theological education this conversation have been. I've been in several conversations about it. It keeps looking at theological education from Eurocentric perspective. The fact that I'm the only brown person in the conversation at this point says that we're missing efforts that are really being done in other racial and minority groups, not just Hispanics, that I think should be part of the conversation on all this. And so I just wanted to point that out, because, for instance, the whole question of sustainability of churches, it means a whole different thing for Hispanic pastors. Being having a sustainable church doesn't mean having money to keep up with the buildings, when most of our pastors are bivocational. So sustainability is a different thing. I just wanted to point out how we are with a framework of theological education that is very Eurocentric.
Brian, you've done a lot of thinking about this and recognize some of these same issues. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, first, I want to thank Fernando for that comment. And it is a huge problem. Fernando, I won't go into all the details. My understanding is Jeremy, who helped organize this. We had worked hard to get a variety of voices involved, and we hope that will be the case in future ones of these. But and there have been a lot more diversity in the in-person gatherings, but there were some setbacks for this one. But your point is well taken. I wonder if I could ask you, Fernando, when you look in your context, maybe you could just tell us, I don't know, your denominational context or whatever, but in your context, dealing especially with bivocational pastors, what do you see happening that's good, and where do you see the big gaps are? Could you say something about that, Fernando?
Yes. Well, one of the things that we're trying to do is to see theological education as a continuum that connects the local congregation with Bible institutes, which are kind of the medium ground for especially our pastors, and then how to connect that with the world of the academy. And I think we need to work more intentionally on that connection of seeing theological education as a continuum from the pew to the lectern in a seminary. One of the things that I have discovered with my encounters with different pastors in different cities in the States, let me make a parenthesis here. I direct an organization that promotes theological education for Hispanic in this country and mainly in this country at this point. Knowing that most of them have no access to seminary education, knowing that most of them have very low level of education, and still knowing that many of them are open and eager to be well trained and be recognized by that training. And that's one reason, for instance, one of the things we worked recently, and even in the context of the traditional seminary education, is that we created a path through a certification process of Latina programs that comply with certain standards and allows graduates of those Bible institutes to go into seminaries that want to register in master degrees without having a bachelor's degree, which saves time and money, but they are able to prove that those students graduate from these programs capable of doing master level work. And I think that's a big thing that I think a path that we have opened. And again, two things that I'm close with this. I see the eagerness of many pastors to be better trained because recognize the need and the challenges of the church now. Second, third generation challenges from in this case of the Hispanics. But at the same time, I see, because I've been part of seminary education, myself, I was a professor in a seminary, is the disconnect of what we do in the classrooms with the local church. And that's why what I'm doing now is very challenging but fulfilling in the way of how we are able to make that continuum really organic and functional.
Fernando, thank you so much for your work and for those comments. We just have time for one more. Somebody that has a comment, you can use that raise your hand feature, and we'll turn your video and audio on and ask for your input.
We have Hank Prager.
Hank. Hello, Hank.
All right.
Am I on?
You're on, yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, as maybe the only actual European in this group, being from Holland, I'd like to comment. Of course, it's true that most of the faces here are white. But I found it, having been in missions for over the last 15 years, going cross-culturally, I've also studied the history of the church in that way, going not only horizontal in as far as being diverse, across cultures, but also diverse through history and learning from the churches in history, or the voices from the theologians back in history creates diversity as well. It certainly did for me. When I started learning from leaders in the church that were, centuries ago, having a great voice that I had never heard before, brought a lot of diversity in my thinking. So I've just thought about this kind of vertical diversity as well, as a way to encourage this movement.
Can I make a comment about that? Thanks for that point. I think a lot of folks, already we mentioned this big gap between what happens in the academy and what happens in the local church. And I think for a lot of people, they've never been exposed to that historical diversity that you refer to. So that even that tends to broaden our horizons. But I think one of our huge challenges in both Catholicism and Protestantism, and Orthodoxy in its own way, the fact that even all of the voices from our past, the vast majority of them tend to be European. This is one of, I think, the huge challenges as we move forward. How do we broaden out the set of voices that we hear from? And I think the struggle that we've had even in this call, or even in this seminar today, just reminds us that as we move forward, if we have to keep trying, and it's difficult, but this becomes extremely important. Just a quick anecdote. a Congolese theologian named Mabiala Kenzo, who's become a dear friend. He said it to me this way. He said, at what point do we start treating the theological voices from around the world as peers rather than as sort of the understudies and so on? So that's really going to be important as we move forward.
Thanks, Brian. Thank you, Hank. We hope you've enjoyed this experience. We think there's a great future of this, but this isn't the only way that the Reimagining Theological Education enterprise is going to, or network is going to find its way forward. Use that enterprise, I think, as I'm stuck with the Star Trek analogy. We're not just going to be on the enterprise. Jeremy, if you would give us, to finish out our time, a last reminder of the ways that people can be connected. But I wondered, Kelly and Eric and Philip, as those who helped do something about this, any last comments that you have for us on the project that we're involved in and how people can find their way forward?
As I've said several times, I think what Fernando raised is really key for me. I mean, I agree this is another Eurocentric white male conversation, and I think it can't be that for long. And so I think if anything like this is going to be powerful enough to really impact the future, we've got to get the right people at the table. And I think, Fernando, you lifted up something great. It's already happening in these communities that have just had to figure this out. That's what Kelly lifted up in her conversation about the pizza in the room. It's like, it's not, we don't need to invent something. It's happening out there. God's doing it somewhere. We just need to like connect the right people, and just the right people need to be at the table. So thanks for lifting that up. I really appreciated that.
Yeah, and I would speak to that too, that it really needs to be grassroots. That as the connections are made and the chemical reactions happen, that out of that will come a great credentialing system that can be portable around the country. But the first thing is to get the right people at the table so we can get those really great chemical busy reactions.
I'm good. I'm spoken, so I want to turn it back to Doug and Jeremy.
Thanks, Jeremy. Would you give us an update on how people can be engaged and involved in all the good work that's going on inside the Reimagining Theological Education project?
Yeah, absolutely. First, let me mention Eric just posted a link to a handout that he has on craft seminary categories. So that's available all through his website as a PDF. So this is sort of a listing of, or 2 columns that physically demonstrate the analogy that we're drawing between the Brewers Association and startup programs, alternative forms of education that are happening already within theological education. So we really are eager to connect with these programs and not to build some sort of top-down network where we tell you what we think the best practices are, but we're interested in listening and hearing your needs and building the network around those needs so that everybody gets strengthened by the work that we can do together. So our first step is going to be to connect with some of these key programs. And if you want to connect with us, by all means, send us an email and we'd be happy to have a conversation with you in the next couple of weeks. In addition, RTE will be hosting a series of conversations at the Open Faith event that Doug is leading through the Open Network. So if you Google Open Network, or we'll put the link to the website in the chat window, that event is happening the first week of October at Christian Theological Seminary in Indianapolis. So if you can register for that, that'll be our next face-to-face encounter or event where we want to start to bring some of these programs together to talk about future needs and how we can build this network together. Thanks.
Okay, well, thank you, everybody. The video recordings of this will be put together, including the little videos that you saw. They'll be available to you, and also the edited version of this overall summit that we've had. So thank you so much for being part of the Reimagining Theological Education Summer Summit 2016.